The Eurostar, on its way from Paris to London, is designed for speed and safety. Near Staplehurst, it crosses a narrow bridge where all the dangers of the early railways were cruelly exposed. Long before the Eurostar, a South Eastern Railway Express brought passengers returning from France on exactly the same route. The boat train, as it's known, connected passengers from the cross-channel ferry at Folkestone. This was 1865, and railways were still a new, developing technology. The boat train's top speed of 45 miles an hour was something to marvel at. But how would it survive a crash? On June 9th, repairs were taking place on the bridge over the narrow river Bult. Workmen had begun removing old rails and replacing them with new ones.
This was quite a small bridge over a muddy stream, and rails were fitted on the top of the longitudinal timbers. Now the gang of men were changing these rails, and they'd almost finished the job, only one or two more to do. Now here is a potentially dangerous situation. There's no rails. If a train comes along, then you've obviously got a disaster.
At first, the train crew couldn't understand why there were people on the line. There was no repair work scheduled at that time. The workmen heard the whistle. The new rails were still not in place. They rushed to warn the train. Too late. Ten passengers were crushed to death in the wreckage of the boat train.
I was in the only carriage that did not go over into the stream. It hung suspended in an apparently impossible manner.
A survivor described the horror in a letter to a friend.
I got out with great caution. Suddenly I came upon a man covered with blood. I couldn't bear to look at him. Then I stumbled over a lady lying on her back, with the blood streaming over her face. The next time I passed her, she was dead. In writing these words of recollection, I feel the shake, and am obliged to stop. Ever faithfully, Charles Dickens.
He had been travelling back from France, where he'd been, for a number of weeks, he'd been finishing manuscripts for Our Mutual Friend, which would be his last completed novel, and caught the boat train. The fact that he had so narrowly escaped, and it was a very, very narrow escape for him, was quite a remarkable story. Detailed etchings were made of the accident and showing Dickens moving among the wounded, tending them.
It was the most sensational accident in the industry's then brief history. The question on everyone's lips, why had the boat train met with disaster?
Because the train purely met the ferry from France, it left at a different time every day, changing every day because of the tides, of course. So a very complicated set of timetables was drawn up to take account for that. And the foreman of the works obviously got the wrong one. He had sent a man down the track with a red flag to warn any oncoming train before it got to the bridge. Now, the man positioned himself purely by counting telegraph poles. Now, on this stretch of line, the telegraph poles were closer together than they were on a standard railway line, so he wasn't far enough back. All of these little incidences contrived to make sure that the train was coming over the bridge that wasn't completed at that time.
The public was shocked by a crash that nearly killed the most famous man of his time. There was an investigation, but one key witness remained silent.
Charles didn't go to the inquiry because he needed to keep very quiet about his travelling companions. He was travelling with a young lady by the name of Ellen Ternan, and Ellen was, in fact, his mistress. with his position in society, he just couldn't afford for that fact to come out. But Victorian society wouldn't have accepted that at all.
In this crash, human error played its part. But why had a derailment so quickly turned into a disaster? What part did design play in the destruction of the boat train?
The couplings which held the train together were purely a screw coupling which went over a hook, and in this accident particularly it wasn't strong enough to bear the forces exerted when the second and succeeding coaches fell into the stream. The screw coupling just snapped. Early in the 20th century, a new type of coupling known as a Buckeye coupling was devised, which was far stronger than the screw coupling and far less liable to break in two following a collision. And certainly in recent times it's enabled trains to remain intact and upright following derailment.